Okay, let's finish.
Yeah,
We're gonna skip. Okay, we're gonna skip fire safety because y'all are gonna watch the a little lecture video over that tomorrow. So we'll do that one, but we'll get through everything.
Have the package away.
Okay, restraints. You've probably seen, like Jacob was saying, on TV. Sometimes people will get crazy and they'll like give them a shot of something. That's a chemical restraint because it's a medication that you're giving them. That is really only done in like extreme cases. I mean, that's not something like, oh, they're acting crazy, let me give them a shot and knock them out.
It's like hitting people.
No, that's like, yeah. I mean, that's very.
Yeah, that happens in a lot of movies.
We actually, one time I had some students doing clinicals, or we did like our full day over at Sulphur Springs, and they had to help like do restraints and stuff on a guy because he was, I don't know if he was, I think he was just under the influence of something. I don't know who knows what it was wrong. So I'm sure emergency room wise, you would see that a lot because people come in, who knows?
People that want drugs.
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of people come through the ER that are drug seekers. So that becomes, anyways. And we had to do that some at Children's. I mean, we had some kids, but not very. I can't ever think of a time when we gave somebody medicine to actually like knock them out at Children's. Of course, they're typically were smaller and easier to restrain. But there are, let's just read this and then we'll go. It says there's many types of restraints. You have soft restraints, leather, wrist, waist, and vest. This is a wrist restraint.
Hey, do you need to film this?
I am.
Okay. Just making
So,
sure. Checking up
thank
on
you for running it. And please do that in the future because I don't want to forget because I have to spend, a giant amount of my own time recording it again, which is really annoying. Says restraints require a doctor's order to be applied. So it's not like me as a nurse, I'm working in the emergency room. I can't just decide, okay, I want to put restraints on this person because they're getting on my nerves or whatever reason, That's not something that you can just decide on your own. Now, sometimes what happens is somebody gets extremely crazy and you put restraints on them, but at the same time, the doctor's writing the order for it kind of thing. Does that make sense? Like,
he's got to write something for restraints?
Yes. Yes. Now, they could probably give a verbal order, but it would have to be written like pretty much immediately. I mean, it's like restraints have lots of rules around them. Lots. I mean, you'll get a whole, when you go to work somewhere, you'll get a whole packet of stuff on just restraints and the rules. Because you take away their freedom when you do that. I mean, that's something, that's like a basic human right that people have, and that's what you take away when you put restraints on them. So it's a big controversial issue. It can turn into, remember last year we talked about legal ethical issues, and one of the things was putting your hands on someone or restraining them, and I can't think of the term right now. It's called it's some kind of, I guess it's battery, actually, is what, assault and battery. Anyways, so yes, you can get in big trouble for that. Do what?
Like at big hospitals and stuff, they'll have like police officers and stuff like sit around. Do they come and help?
They could, yeah, they needed to.
Would that be like a different scenario where the doctor wouldn't have to write something up, or no?
No, if they're going to get restraints put on in the hospital, they're going to need an order.
But the police can.
Now the policeman like handcuffs them because they're in there for something that they did. That's probably different. That's different than restraining them like to the bed. Does that make sense? That's a different type of issue. Says restraints should only be applied to the level of keeping them and others safe. So you don't want to put a straitjacket on someone for, if you can get the job done with just holding their wrist down kind of thing. That makes sense. If a restraint is tied, the knot should not be placed at a bony prominence. Why is that?
Hurts.
what happens at bony prominences that have lots
Sore,
of,
it'll.
yeah, you can get pressure sores. Now that's unlikely for somebody who's in fairly good health, but you know, they may not be so. Says if a client is restrained, he or she should be checked every 15 to 30 minutes. Now that is going to change depending on the company policy. There's always going to be, you know, whatever. Like when I was at Children's, if we had restraints on someone, I can't even remember for sure the policy, but they had to be in view. We had one area, we called it observation, where it was like we had the nurse's desk, and then there were 5 rooms, and they were all completely glass on the front, so you could see into each room. And these rooms, we kind of stripped everything off the walls, and that's where we took any kind of kids who were in for psych reasons, who might be a suicide risk or a risk to hurt somebody, whatever. And that was so we could watch them, and you had to check. If you put restraints on them, you have to check like every however often, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is. You have to physically check them, and they have to be released and taken off every so often as well. It just depends on the company policy as to what you have to do. It says restraints should only be used for the duration ordered or for however long they're useful. So you don't want to keep them on longer than that. Again, assault and battery, you can be charged with that. Restraints are tied to the bed frame, not the side rails. Why would that be important?
You break his side.
Maybe break them, but why else? Yeah, they go down. Okay, if you get your arm stuck in there and the side rail goes down, you could break somebody's arm or really injure them. It says limb restraints should be checked frequently for impaired circulation, so make sure that they're not too tight. Make sure they can move their fingers and they're not turning blue or anything like that. It says use a clove hitch knot or a double clove hitch knot. And I look this up every year and I never can remember how to do it. I haven't used restraints a whole lot. But it's one that it's like one of those that when you pull it, it gets tighter, but it's still easy to release. You want something that's easy to release. Why is that?
So if you have to get them off quickly.
Yes, if you need to get them out, like what if there's a fire or something else going on? You need to be able to, you know, untie it very quickly. So I'll look when I actually have a handout somewhere that's got how to do that knot on it. I'll have to find it.
So I have a question.
I feel
What's
like it's how you tie like a leader on the other side.
I think it's Boy Scout book.
So what's the difference between like those restraints and a restraint on like a stretcher? Like how they strap them down and stuff. Would that matter at all?
That one would be a little different because that's not really a restraint per se because it's safety wise. That's something that you're doing. Now, if you left them on that stretcher, you know, down for a long period of time, yes, I guess that's how you're using it technically.
You're using it as safety, not as a restraint.
Yeah. Granted, I mean, restraints are used for safety, but you're not going to restrain them. I mean, one, they're not going to stay on that stretcher long term.
Right.
Hopefully. But, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to look at that. I'm sure they also have restraints, like as far as in an ambulance goes, like something like this, that they actually used to restrain their arms.
They use
and stuff.
like the rolls of ace bandages, I believe. That's what that is.
So I don't know. Ask him the question on that, because ask him, because I'd be interested to know if those are considered restraints, and if not, you know, how do they get around them? I'm sure he knows. These are called posy restraints. They're just wrist restraints, very soft, so that you know you don't increase that risk of pressure sores. There's also vests. Let me have a vest for that.
Good thing.
Let's see.
That's pretty cool. Get the straight jacket.
Yeah, I do. Here's the vest.
That would make me go crazy.
So This one you can actually strap them like down in a chair. Needed to.
Where does it work?
Let's see.
Can we strap you to a chair? Just to see, you know how it
Yeah,
works.
just for educational purposes.
But it just wraps around. Now this, a lot of times you might see.
Stylish, too.
Anyways, this you might see a doctor order for like somebody who has dementia or something who can't remember that, who needs to be in a wheelchair because maybe they fall or something like that, but they don't realize that they're a fall risk. That makes sense.
Oh,
So
yeah.
sometimes you'll see these, the same rules with like still a restraint, so there still have to be good documentation.
So
on
that's for basically just tied up to a chair and not.
You mean-
I mean, I think you get time to a bed too with that to keep them, leaning up or whatever. But other times you might use restraints besides when somebody's just, kind of like out of their mind. It's like maybe after surgery. Sometimes when people come out of surgery, they are really, really confused. So that might be, or they like start pulling tubes out and stuff like that. That's another time you might see use restraints for a short period of time. What else? It just has to do with safety. If they're, risking harm to themselves or someone else, those are times when restraints are used. That's the only time they're never used just because somebody's getting on your nerves or whatever. Okay, general safety. It says identify the client prior to getting care. Always, any kind of time you do a procedure or anything else. My sister had surgery on spring break. No, it was 2 years. It was not this last one, but the year before. And she got down to the OR and they pull out her paperwork and they're like, "Oh, you had blood?" And she's like, "No, I didn't have blood." They're like, "It says here that you had blood." She's like, "No, this was the wrong person's information in her chart." And she went down to surgery. Would have been done like the wrong surgery or something. Crazy, but anyway.
Same thing almost happened to my mom. She got her legs like checked out, and then they're like, "Oh, this is the wrong Janine Johnson." Yeah.
This person didn't even have the same name. They had like, I don't know.
Like
So
Caroline's.
always check their bracelets. Okay? Do what?
I was saying somebody.
I mean, it's crazy. So always, any procedure or medication that you do, it's always important to check names. Not that you guys will be doing that.
I might be.
Teachers and students, please record these announcements. All those planning to
Okay. Okay, general safety. Identify client. It says perform 5 checks before leaving any client or resident's room. Check to see if the side rails are up if they're supposed to be. Why would you do that?
Because they could like fall off.
They fall
Yeah,
out.
so they don't fall. Double going on there.
Hey, I like to watch you.
Okay. Is the bed in the lowest position? Again, fall so that they don't fall very comfortable. Just something that's easy to ask. And that's a big thing. Let me tell you something. It doesn't matter how good of a nurse, EMT, doctor, whatever you are. If you genuinely care about them, they're going to think you're awesome. Because, it's just the way people work. They don't feel good. They want somebody who's going to be nice to them. Even if you're not necessarily the best at starting an IV or whatever it is that you have to do. Are the call bell and supplies within reach? Anything that they need? And then other rules of bed lock. And then, of course, wash your hands. Okay, oxygen safety. It says oxygen does not burn, but it supports combustion. Oxygen is one of the things that fire needs to continue. So that's really important. Have y'all ever noticed if you walk into somebody's home and they're on oxygen, a lot of times they'll have like a no smoking sign on their door or in the room, whatever. That's why, because they don't want you to bring a cigarette in there and then they have all this oxygen and that ignite a fire. I mean, I've seen people burn their nostrils because they smoke. They'll be like, have oxygen in their nose and they'll just be like chain smoking. really dangerous. And that could like explode in their face.
That would suck.
Flammable materials such as oil should not be used around oxygen. That's one of the reasons they'll tell them not to use specific things on their face. Store and use it safely away from hot sources and sunlight. Anything that's going to be at risk to make it hot or start on fire. It always needs to stay on a stand. Have y'all ever seen people carrying around like a tank that's on a little rolly cart?
Yeah.
Okay. It just needs to be accessible for them to carry around. It says tanks that fall can begin spinning out of control if the oxygen begins to leak, like a missile idea.
Oh.
Don't use it if it's cracked or if you have trouble opening the tank. And that's something, most oxygen tanks you'll see have a regulator on them. That's the part that has the little dial. And it'll say if it's full or how much it has in it, what the pressure is. That's called a regulator. And that's what you actually hook it up to.
Do you get those tanks refilled, or do you just have to get
You
it
get them
completely
refilled.
filled?
Or you
Lean
can
them over. Lean them over.
How do they-
Top off of them.
How did you? Oh, I mean,
Sometimes some people have
Yes.
a portable one too that they can just carry on their shoulder. They can fill up with their tank at home, and it has oxygen in it too. It's important to humidify the oxygen. That's if you ever go into somebody's home and they're on oxygen, they have a little canister, or a lot of times even at the hospital, you'll see a little canister with water in it that helps to humidify it so it doesn't dry out the respiratory system. Skin care is really important because people can get pressure sores from those tubes in their nose because it's constant pressure in that area and it rubs the media. Says crack tanks away from your eyes. You just don't open whatever. You just don't want ever anything that you're opening chemical wise. You don't want to point at yourself or anybody else. Does make sure that you only use oxygen that's designated for humans, which you can do that, but, and then regulator. Housekeeping. So always want to clean up any spills right in. Don't wait because depending on what it is, it could grow bacteria. If it's some kind of human fluid, it can be, fall risk. It can, chemical-wise, it can cause problems. So always clean up right in. If you don't know what it is, you need to consider it hazardous. So just treat it like it is, like it's hazardous. Caution signs have to be displayed after the spill's been cleaned up while the floor is still wet so that people don't fall again. I know you hear me talking about falls, but falling is a big problem. I mean, a lot of people get injured with falls. Now, for you guys, if you trip and fall, probably not going to hurt you. But for somebody who has osteoporosis, who has arthritis, who is elderly, or already frail because of whatever other reason, it is a big deal. If you'll notice, a lot of elderly people, a lot of times falls are kind of that one thing that really pushes them over the edge that makes them sick for a long period of time or kind of makes them go downhill. That happens a lot, and that's just because their immune system is weak and they're trying to heal from that. And
And they get real bad bruised.
so, yes, they do
Right.
generally bruise
Face is like,
really
oh.
severely. And skin tears is another big one with falls. So your skin's just really like so thin, it'll just, it just tears really easily. Housekeeping equipment must be stored out of the way when you're not using it. Don't let people trip and fall again. Check linens for pins, dentures, lancets. You know what a lancet is? That's one of those little bitty needles that's used to check blood sugar.
Oh.
Like the tea tiny needles. Anything that if you're sending it to laundry. Lap bowls, paper towels, make sure they're always available, and soap. That should be a gimme. Speaking of that, if y'all don't know the bathrooms over here and there's not soap, let me know and I'll put in a request to have them refilled. I know that's been a problem in the past. I always write that on my end of the year. How do we improve things every year?
keep hands
Sure,
over
soap is
in
refilled.
those.
Never mix solutions. Like, look, a mixture of bleach and ammonia can form poisonous fumes. Those are like household, everyday items. Read labels of solutions 3 times before you use them. Just make sure you check it when you take it off the shelf, you check it again when you use it, and then you check it again whenever you replace it. Make sure that you got the right thing Okay, we'll do fire safety tomorrow. Electrical safety. Says electricity is a vital part of healthcare. Obviously, you need it, but it can be really dangerous because there's lots of things healthcare-wise that we do that involve electricity plus water or whatever else you got going on. So, of course, the dangers are shock, fire, explosion, potentially oxygen, whatever, burns. It always follows the path of least resistance. What does that mean? It says it always follows the path of least resistance.
The easiest.
What flows through?
Yeah.
What it flows through the easiest?
Right, that's
Where it
the
goes
direction
first.
it's going to go. Always seeks a ground, which is why ground wires have been placed on equipment in the hospital. That's that third prong in a plug-in. That's really, I think that's the ground part of it, right? I'm not very electrically minded, but yeah. Ground wires allow electricity to flow back into the grounding system, prevent it from flowing through some other conductor that you don't want it to flow through. So, closing a circuit, that was actually when I was in college, you know,
Interesting
when
video.
you got into that water, you
Yes,
can
sir.
see that. So that's what, you know, those things are crazy. My point in telling you that is just that,
Yeah.
one, it's really important that electrical safety is not something that you just take for granted. It's something that's, again, you can't see it, so it's something you have to make sure that it's taken care
They
of.
like glasses.
So it says that shorts need to be taken care of and frayed cords. And that goes for your house or wherever you are. Like those things need to be taken care of because those are the kind of things that leave circuits open that put you at risk. Okay, effects on people. It says it disrupts the body's own electrical current. It causes pain, paralysis, muscle contraction. That's why it gets the heart off, because the heart is a muscle, so it can mess with the beating system, the conduction system of the heart. It says skin is an insulator, so it says the skin is less resistant if it's wet, if you have a cut or something that's open, anything like that. So one of the reasons we know when we learned CPR, we talked about with using the AED, you need to make sure that their skin is dry before you put those pads on, just because water easily conducts electricity. And so that's something that they have a lot of water on their chest, or if they're sitting in a puddle of water, that's where the electricity is going to go instead of through their heart like you need it to if you're using the AED. Prevention, it says all equipment should have 3 prongs. That's why, because that third one is the grounding one. Check cords for sprays, anything like that needs to be reported to maintenance or equipment, whoever handles that. Hazard communication. So it says this bill that was put into place says it states the responsibility of employers to inform their employees of any hazardous substances that are in the work environment. So, you know, there has to be signs, or they have to let you know that somehow. OSHA, which is what?
Occupational Safety Health Administration.
Yes. Oversees the compliance, and then it says there's a comprehensive list of all products that contain hazardous chemicals that they have to keep that somewhere in the facility. Unidentified spills should be cleaned, it says, by environmental services. We toured Greenville Hospital a couple years ago. Were any of you, Flo, were you in that class? We toured Greenville Hospital. Maybe that was the year before that. Anyways, we got to talk to the environmental spills guy, and they have like these suits that they wear and everything. They go clean up stuff. MSDS, have y'all heard of that before?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So material safety data must be maintained on every substance that is in there. For this class, and I didn't say this, again, I don't think, but mine is always up here. So anything that we use in labs or anything, the MSDS sheets are always in.
I was wondering what that was. I always saw that. The MSDS.
anything that we use in any labs in here, all that information is in there. It says the MSDS must contain the manufacturer's name and address, whatever limits there are to exposure, symptoms if something does occur, what you might expect, like if you get your eye burned or whatever. What to do in case of exposure, if it's flammable or not, if there's anything special about it. All of these things have to be included on that sheet. And you'll do a worksheet, I think, on Monday, where you'll get a couple of different things and you'll just go through and find it. All hazardous material containers have to be labeled. Usually you want to keep them in their original container. It's not something you want to put in like a, container that's not labeled or anything. And then the ratings there. Those are pretty self-explanatory. The rating, and all these MSDS sheets have a rating on them. Let's see. So, the ratings are listed over there. Yeah. So, like, there's a health rating, a fire rating, and a reactivity rating, and those give you those. That's where those numbers are located. And they're usually in a little box like this, and there's like a diamond shape, and it's got those three things in it, and you'll be able to see it. They pretty easily on every MSDS sheet. They usually kind of look similar. They'll have all of that information at the front somewhere. So, and a lot of times they'll have those same things on the chemicals themselves. If you've ever noticed, if we're using chemicals, they have a little diamond shape that's got numbers in it. That's what they're talking about for these safety ratings. Okay, driving safety. Pretty self-explanatory. Hopefully all of you guys know this. Make sure you wear your seatbelt, and especially you guys when you're driving around to clinicals. Make sure you go to speed limit.
No.
No texting. Okay.
No sleeping.
No yelling and stuff.
Yeah, don't pull it out in front of
Definitely no
people.
sleeping.
People that
Do that.
And so forth. So if you're involved in an accident, that's what working always contact the supervisor immediately. Okay, I've been at a company where we had somebody was driving on the job, had an accident, kind of turned into a big ordeal because she was actually doing personal business instead of business. And so, anyways, it just gets really hairy. So if driving is part of your job, just make sure that you only do what you're supposed to do. Every little, anything extra you do, I don't know. That particular thing resulted in her losing her job because she was driving somewhere in a company car where she wasn't supposed to be driving. And so, and then she had an accident on top of that, a really bad accident. She was really severely injured. So, and that stinks to really be severely injured and technically be disabled for a while and to get fired because of what you're doing. So, says dealing with difficult people, don't get involved in an altercation. Yeah, don't fight with people at work. I don't know. I think that should be pretty self-explanatory, but you just don't know. Especially with patients who are kind of out of their mind, like it's really important you just get help. You don't try to do any kind of like physical contact on your own. One, you always want a just like a witness with you, because otherwise it's your word against theirs if something comes up. Says don't argue or confront someone who's intoxicated or under an influence. Just again, get help if you need it. That happens a lot in the emergency room. And I would think with EMTs, that's probably something that they come across a lot. So that's it. We'll talk about fire safety tomorrow. And
Awesome.